In the last lesson, you learned how to use functions. In this lesson, you'll learn how to define functions. Here's a list of concepts that we'll touch on. You'll learn how to define functions. You'll learn several concepts related to that, arguments, and return statement. Start by navigating to repl.it/languages/python3. You should then see a screen like this one. To start, how do we define a function? As we mentioned before, think of functions from your math class. As a recap, functions accept some input value and return some value. Consider the square function. Take in a number x, multiply x with itself, and return the squared number. Here, start with def, def. Then, follow it with the function name, and then a set of parentheses and a colon. In between the parentheses, add your input argument. In this case, our function square only takes in one argument, which will denote x. Then, add 2 spaces. These 2 spaces are extremely important. These spaces are how Python knows that you are now adding code to the function. Since this function is simple, the first and only line of our function is a return statement. The return statement stops the function and returns whatever expression comes next. For us, the expression is x times itself. Here are all the parts annotated once more. Note that all parts in black are needed to define any functions. You always need a def, parentheses for the input arguments, and a colon to denote the function is starting. You also need the return statement to return values to the programmer calling your function. The function name, inputs, and expressions can all change. How do I use my own function? Just like you would call any other function, use parentheses and pass your input argument in. In this case, we pass in the argument value 5. Your function then accepts the argument 5 and assigns the variable x to the value 5. Effectively, the square function replaces all x's with 5s and finally returns 5 times 5 or 25. Now, let's try coding this up. Like at the end of the last session, you will now write code in a file instead of in the interpreter. To the left, in main.py, define your first function. Type in def, square, x, and don't forget the colon at the end of the first line. Go ahead and then return x times x. That's a lot at once, but fortunately, this is exactly what we just covered in the slides. Make sure there are 2 spaces before your return statement. Also make sure there's a colon at the end of the first line. As a good sanity check, check that the colors of each part of your code are the same as mine. My def and return are blue. My square is purple. Go ahead and hit run. Now you can call your brand new function, just like you would call any other function. To the right, in your interpreter, call the function. Type in square of 5. As expected, this returns the square of 5 or 25. Let's try a few more. Square of -1 and square of 3. We will now write our second nifty tool, a temperature checker for any city in the world. Start by importing the URL opening function that we used in the last lesson. We tend to add import statements to the top of our file, so go ahead and at the very top of your file, type in from URL lib.request import URL open. Then define your new function. This new function will, given a city as an input argument, return the temperature for that city by reading a web page. First, write the boilerplate for a function. Def, and then the function name, getTemperature, and then the argument, followed by a colon. Don't forget your colon at the end of that line. As a sanity check, again, check your colors. For the next line, don't forget to add 2 spaces in front. If you hit enter when your cursor is at the end of that colon, Repl.it will automatically add 2 spaces for you. Next, construct a URL from the city. Go ahead and type in URL is equal to the address plus the city plus a little more. I'm going to go ahead and drag this right here so that you can see more of my code on the left-hand side. Go ahead and type in double quote and then format equals the following. The details of the weather.in website are not important. All you need to know is that this website offers weather data if you call a URL like wttr.in/Paris. Next, go ahead and load that web page. Page is equal to URL open URL. Next, go ahead and read the data on that page. Raw is equal to page.read. We saw before that reading from a web page can result in a bunch of nonsense output. This is because the return data is in an unreadable format. we're going to call decode so that we can read the return data. Go ahead and type in temp is equal to raw.decode, and UTF-8 is just a form of data that we can read easily. Finally, return the temperature. We're now done with the function. Go ahead and hit enter, and once you're on a new line, make sure to hit backspace so that you are now no longer in the function. Like before, we will use the input function to ask the user for input. Here, you'll ask the user for a city name. Go ahead and type in city is equal to input, double quote, city. This city : will be the prompt, and the input function will return the user inputted text. Now, let's go ahead and call the brand new function that you just created by passing in the city that the user inputted. Type in temp is equal to getTemperature of city. Finally, print the return temperature. Click run at the very top, and you can see here now there is a prompt asking us for a city. Go ahead and type in whatever city you would like. I'm going to type in Paris. And there we go. Your Nifty tool then returns the temperature. Nice work. You'll notice that there is now an orange caret indicating the Python interpreter and not your program is listening for your input. In order to try the program again, go ahead and hit run at the very top of your screen. If you receive none instead of the temperature, this means that on line 15, the print function was printing a variable with value none. This means that temp has value none. In line 14, temp was assigned to the value none. This means that the function getTemperature must have returned the value none. This means that you've maybe forgotten line 11 in your function getTemperature. A function by default without a return statement returns the value none. So as a result, if you see the value none in your program output, go ahead and make sure you did not forget line 11. REPL.it automatically saves your work. If you'd like to change the name of your REPL.it for easier access later on, at the very top of your screen, right next to your name, go ahead and click on the title, and you can then rename your project. If you run into any errors, make sure to double check your code against mine. A quick check is, do the colors match? If the colors do not match, you may have forgotten an end quote, an end parentheses, or the colon. Also, don't hesitate to post in the discussion section if you run into any problems, and me and your peers will be more than happy to help. You've learned a lot in this lesson as usual. This is a quick summary of the concepts you've touched on, defining functions, arguments, and return statements. If you'd like to access and download these slides, or view completed code for the example in this lesson, visit this URL. You can now define custom functions as needed. This completes the section on functions. In the next lesson, you'll learn about control logic. Sounds fancier than it actually is, but you'll find those tools extra helpful in building nifty tools.